This is my proposal for Twitter on how to solve the problem of identity and validation. In particular, how to validate tweets on Twitter so that a consensus truth emerges and the incentive structure in the system is such that good actors get proliferated and bad actors get marginalized. Before I go into the details, let me introduce myself a little bit. My name is Krim Delko. I run a hedge fund called Orange Capital Partners together with my partner Zovinar. We are based in Los Altos, California, and we're particularly focused on technology and in particular three big areas: electrification, decarbonization of transport, the blockchain technology, and CRISPR technology, and the digitalization of life science. This is about me professionally. Also, I have been working in this business for the last 15 years. Before that, I was on Wall Street for close to a decade as a derivatives trader, and I also have been writing columns for a Swiss newspaper, a company that I actually worked for right out of college. And I've been writing for them for a couple of years out of college, and then I wrote a weekly column for almost 20 years. So I have experience in journalism, in particular when it comes to topics of freedom, topics of liberty, topics of economic freedom. All those sort of things are very, very dear to my heart. So having said that, now let's talk about my proposal. What is the problem? The problem is, how can we validate tweets, excuse me, on Twitter in a way that makes the consensus truth emerge on the platform? So when I say consensus truth, I'm trying to be careful here because I don't want to necessarily assume that there is a truth. In many cases, there isn't a truth. There's, of course, a lot of situations where there is truth. If I say that President Biden was murdered today, then hopefully that's wrong, and that's a fact that can be checked. But if I say something along the lines of venture capital is corrupt, that's neither right nor wrong, but there could be a consensus truth that maybe emerges on the platform that helps people understand that a lot of venture capital is something along those lines. Maybe not corrupt in a legal way, but in a sort of more a feels corrupt kind of way. So anyway, I just wanted to caveat that. But let's talk about consensus and what is it actually, why is this even a problem? So Twitter was run by a bunch of people and lots of people who were in charge of organizing what is right and wrong on the platform. And this was, in my opinion, the main reason why Elon Musk bought the company, because he wasn't happy with the way this was done on the platform. In other words, we had a sort of a central authority, even though the central authority itself was hundreds and maybe thousands of people making decisions about which tweets to allow and which tweets not to allow and which people to cancel. Nevertheless, it has this feel of propaganda, of centralized authority. And this is what we're trying to avoid. We don't want centralized authority. We want a situation where decentralized decision-making takes hold. So the goal of Twitter, in my point of view, should not be to proliferate free speech, because free speech is a bad problem. And in epistemology, leaning on Karl Popper here and David Deutsch, problems are classified in good and bad, in a sense that a bad problem is a problem that is not clear and therefore doesn't have clear solutions. And free speech is one of those. What is free speech? We're not so sure what it is. Therefore, we can't really find good solutions. So I want to rephrase the problem in having decentralized authority that decides what is and what isn't. That is a good problem to solve, because we can solve decentralization. Why? Well, we have, I would say, 5 big technologies that were invented in the last 500 years, let's say, that are going towards that type of solution. Okay, what I mean by that? Let's talk about the technologies. Financial markets, number 1. Number 2, the scientific process. Number 3, democracy, which of course was invented by the Greeks and even probably before that elsewhere. But the modern version of democracy, let's call it, started with the Enlightenment and the French Revolution and all that stuff. And then we have 2 more modern ways of dealing with decentralized authority. One is blockchain technology, and I want to focus on the Bitcoin protocol here, with all due respect to all the other protocols, just for simplicity and also for strength. Let's focus on Bitcoin, and then we have the last one, which I think is actually often goes under in the discussion. That's GitHub. GitHub is, as far as I'm concerned, the only real practical solution in the business world where engineering projects, software engineering projects, can be done in decentralized manner and concluded successfully and actually deliver value to everybody. So those are the 5 technologies that I think Twitter should be leaning on. So if I was to work for Twitter, I would want to work in a field that tries to combine the idea of, okay, what is it we want? Tries to find answers to the question, what is it we actually want? And my answer to that is we want to have decentralized validation, and tries to bridge that with the people that actually implemented, in particular software engineers, server people, all of that stuff that actually is necessary to make it happen. So my role would be more on the, let's call it the mechanism design side, to borrow a phrase from Tim Roughgarden, the head of research at A16Z, that I recently saw at a conference. And I thought that was a very good way to think about these types of problems. It's mechanism design, because we want to create an incentive structure that goes towards a certain goal. And in this case, the incentive structure is embedded in the decentralized decision-making process to surface consensus truth on Twitter. This is the first and most important goal. I want to, hopefully I can also, in this proposal, come a little bit closer to questions such as commercialization, maybe even some ethical and moral questions. But most fundamentally, I think if Twitter can solve the validation problem, then it would be a huge step forward. So how to solve the validation problem? I think this is the key question. And I would start with blockchain technology here. I think this is the closest one that we have available to us. We have a solution. Nakamoto consensus, for example, is a solution that could be applied to Twitter. In other words, every tweet goes through a validation process, and once validated, gets added to a block, and then the block gets added to the blockchain. The same analogy applies in terms of incentivization. So for example, we could have tokens issued by Twitter that the validators and everybody else gets those tokens. How they get them, that's another conversation. That would be the commercialization question. But let's just assume now we have tokens. We'll talk about how you get those tokens and how they gain in value and lose value and things like that. But let's talk about, again, let's talk about the validation process. So you have to stake tokens in order to validate tweets to get added to a block. And then when they get validated to a block, you have to stake another set of tokens to add the block to the blockchain. So key here is, of course, that if you don't get validated, then whatever you staked, you lose. So you have a high incentive to only validate stuff that you think can actually be validated and eventually added to the blockchain. Let's take GitHub. GitHub has a consensus mechanism implicit in the GitHub platform. For those who don't know, GitHub is an open source software development platform that allows people to start a project and then other people to collaborate in a decentralized manner on top of the project. Now, the way you do that is you write code, and then you let's say I start a project, I write code, and then somebody else reads my code and then suggests certain changes to that code, and those changes get validated through a particular consensus process. And this is where I want to sort of dig in a little bit. So the consensus process at GitHub works in a way, there's top down and bottom up. Let's talk top down. So I am the repository maker, so the genesis. I start a certain code, and then I also imply that within the code or within my project, I say, look, these are the consensus mechanisms that I want to be used for people who want to collaborate. You can also have a bottom-up approach where people who contribute can say, well, if I want to contribute, and this is the kind of consensus mechanism that I want to be used, that I want to be used for my particular recommendation. So there's bottom up and top down. And I think for Twitter, it'd be interesting if we lean towards the bottom up approach, which is that if I originate a tweet, so Genesis is a tweet, I can also imply what kind of consensus mechanism should be used to validate the tweet. I can have no consensus mechanism. I can have unanimous consensus mechanism. I can have random, etc., all kinds of the consensus mechanisms. The same way GitHub has many, anarchy and meritocracy and all that kind of stuff. The point here is that, of course, based on the kind of consensus mechanism that I use as an originator of the tweet, I can then also sort of influence how the tweet will proliferate to the network. And the algorithm of the Twitter network will catch that and be more lenient towards tweets that are unanimously approved versus tweets that are sort of randomly validated. The point here is that this bottom-up approach allows the originators of the tweet to decide how the system proliferates. Another interesting validation concept that was developed in the last couple hundred years are the financial markets. Ideas that we could use for validation purposes. Financial markets work in the following way. You create a security, an IPO, you list on the market, and then you get validated through value. That means if your stock goes up, you get validation. If your stock goes down, you get the negative side of validation. What's interesting here is the ability to short things, which I think is a very powerful concept in financial markets. Shorting is a very important mechanism, actually, because it sort of validates a stock even more, because knowing that you can short something and it's still valuable means that, well, it should be really valuable then. In other words, could we have a system where tweets or where the value of tweets could be shorted so that the validation even has a stronger sort of, what's the word, character. So how would that work? Let's say now, before I go there, let's just talk real quick about value in the system, okay? So let's say you join Twitter, you pay $100 a year, and you get tokens for that, Twitter tokens. And you can use those tokens as a validator, or you can use those tokens as a user of Twitter. For example, you could pay for a better presentation of your tweet. You can use it for DMs. You can use it for advertising space. This is a commercialization problem. The fundamental concept of the Twitter token is that there is a token, an implicit token within the Twitter system. It's a little bit like a token that is being used in a video game, that kind of thing. So I don't even want to talk about the sort of the onboarding and offboarding of Twitter tokens into other areas, so the real world or things like that. Let's just leave the token within Twitter. And the token itself can be used by validators to validate tweets. The tokens have value because, again, they can be used for certain privileges that you can gain on the Twitter platform. Then the tweets that are tweeted can gain in value if they are being validated in stronger ways, and in particular also if they then are being retweeted and things like that. Now, of course, there's a lot of caveats here. Bots could misuse that system. Again, I don't want to talk about this too much here. I will try to tangentially also talk about that, but fundamentally, again, there is a certain value associated with tweets, and what I meant with shorting is that maybe there should be a way also to short tweets so they can lose in value if they are wrong. So, for example, if I issue a tweet that President Biden is gay, and then people validate this, let's say, or opponents of President Biden, and then the tweet goes through the system, gets validated, but then the short sellers come in and say, no, this is wrong. He's not. He's just not. Then the value gets lost, and whoever validated this tweet gets punished and therefore loses value. I think my main concept here, without going too much into details, to summarize this proposal is that we can use some powerful techniques that have been used over centuries in terms of validation technology. For example, like I said, financial markets, GitHub, blockchain technology, There's others, like I said, there's the scientific process, which is peer review, things along those lines. And then there's democracy, where we vote to replace. Let's say we could just simply vote and say this tweet should be replaced with another tweet. So that would be, let's say, President Biden has just said that he wants to stop negotiating with China, and then the tweet gets changed because that's wrong into President Biden has said that he is unhappy with the negotiations with China, and that gets even changed to through vote that President Biden is simply not satisfied with the results, but has not announced anything else. So the idea here is that you have a continuous update of the tweets, a little bit like Wikipedia, which, by the way, is another decentralized validation process that I haven't even mentioned. So again, to summarize, my proposal is to use existing validation technologies. I think blockchain being maybe the most interesting one here, and others, to start morphing Twitter into a validation technology platform. So Twitter becomes a validation technology platform. There's a native token, a Twitter token, that allows for validation and proliferation of value throughout the system, and encourages behavior in a way that the consensus truth proliferates through the system, and the inverse of consensus truth gets marginalized in the system. Two more things to add. One, I think it's very important to have skin in the game. So whatever the system is, there has to be a monetary incentive to people to be part of this. So when they validate things, when things are at stake, when blocks are being validated, people have to either gain value or make money, or risk of losing money. So you don't want to validate things that might not get validated in a block, for example. So you have to have that sort of Bitcoin-esque validation process in place. Again, this is just a rudimentary idea. This is not a proposal with a clear software engineering solution already ready. That's what I've been working on. But my point here is it's a proposal, and I hope that the concept of skin in the game alone could incentivize the structure to go towards consensus truth and marginalize things that aren't true from a consensus perspective. Last thing I want to mention is the legal side of things. I think this whole process here has no real checks and balances when it comes to legal things. So if I write a tweet that say, go kill XYZ, that is an illegal thing. And I think that's something that should not be solved by the platform, simply because the law and legal things can change. So what should be done, I think, for Twitter and anybody else in the business of proliferating things like social media and whatever it is, I think the key is that we have identity solved for. So then the law enforcement can go after the people who, well, let's say, tweeted something that is illegal, and go and punish them. And also when the law changes, then also the tweets and the algorithms that allow for things can change. So for example, if you say, let's say, such and such should be killed, and if that is an illegal thing, that the law of the land decides that in this country you can't do that, then the algorithms should not allow to do that. So it shouldn't be valid. So if you want to validate something like that, you're going to lose money, or it's not going to get validated. So in other words, from the legal perspective, I think we should be very hands-off and have identity solved the same way that, let's say, the town square is not liable for people that do criminal things on the town square. However, the town square should have a CCTV camera to identify people who do bad things, give it to law enforcement, and they can go after these people and put them where they belong. So again, it's very important that you don't get intermingled with the legal side of things, the moral side of things. I think that is something that should not be solved by a platform like Twitter, and should be left to other authorities that are in charge of these kinds of things. Thank you.